Thanks so much for joining us for our Art Matters talk with Amanda McCavour. My name is Corey Fry, by the way. I'm the exhibitions manager at the Delaplane Art Center. If you're in traveling distance of the Delaplane, I'd encourage you to come out and check out our exhibitions. We have 5 different gallery spaces, and there's 5 different shows up right now, all of which will end October 31st. So there's still time to come and check out Amanda's show, as well as the other exhibitions that we have going on. We're open for business Monday through Saturday from 9 to 5 and Sunday from 11 to 5. So we would love to have you out to visit and check things out. The other thing is you can go to our website, which is delaplane.org, and you can see upcoming exhibitions that we have. You can check out the classes that we're offering, workshops, and all the different programming that we do. So go to our website and check those things out. And with that said, I wanted to talk just really briefly about our Contemporary Innovations program that Amanda is a part of. So Contemporary Innovations is a program that's an exhibition series here at the Delaplane. It's dedicated to feature professional contemporary artists on a national and global level. We do a lot of work with regional and local artists, but this program is developed for us to have a bit further of a reach and to be able to bring in artists that really are pushing innovative ways of thinking about what it is to create. And that means either working with new material or pushing the boundaries of material that's previously been used in the art world. And it's just a really exciting program that we have going on. So that's what Amanda McCavour is a part of from September through October. And so you have a month to come in and check those things out. And we'll have another Contemporary Innovations exhibition next September. With that said, I'm going to introduce Amanda McCavour to you real quick. Based in Toronto, Amanda McCavour is a Canadian artist who works with stitch to create large-scale embroidery installations. She holds a BFA from York University, where she studied drawing. In May 2014, she completed her MFA in Fibers and Material Studies at Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. From 2007 to 2010, McCavour was an artist in residence at the Harborfront Center's Craft and Design Studio. Her work has been exhibited in galleries nationally and internationally, with recent solo exhibitions in 2019 at Pinkfield Blue Fog at the Art Gallery in Northumberland, Cobourg, Ontario. I hope I'm saying that, maybe Cobourg, Ontario. Consumed by Clouds at Kootenay Gallery of Art, History and Science, Castlegard in British Columbia. The Floating Garden at Workhouse Art Center in Lorton, Virginia. And Pinkfield Blue Fog at Washington Pavilion Visual Arts Center in Sioux Falls, North Dakota. Upcoming projects for 2022 include new installations for Page Court Chazen Museum of Art in Madison, Wisconsin, a permanent site-specific work at Harborfront Center in Toronto, at a commission for Columbia Museum of Art in Columbia, South Carolina. And McCavour has received numerous awards and scholarships from the Ontario Crafts Council, the Canadian Council for the Arts, the Handweavers and Spinners Guild of America. That sounds like an awesome guild. The Ontario Society of Artists, the Surface Design Association, and the Embroiderers Guild of America. That's awesome. Everybody welcome with me, Amanda McCavour. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Corey. Thanks for that introduction. I feel like there were a bunch of tongue twisters in there. You did a great job.
Thank you. There's Canadians use a bit more often than Americans do, and so it's always a little challenging, but I hope I got all those pronunciations right.
Yeah, you did a great job. Yeah, Cobourg, you did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
What's that?
I was going to say the Hand Weavers and Spinners Guild of America is an amazing organization and everybody should check it out.
And the Embroiderers Guild of America. That's great.
Mhm.
Nice.
Love those.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. I've been telling you, and we've all been talking around here about your exhibition, and we're so excited to have the work up right now. It's been so fun to hear people's reaction and to see the work in person after seeing it for months through digital images and things. And we're really excited to hear from you today. So.
Great. Well, I'm so happy that the work is up. Just so everybody in the webinar knows, there were some challenges and Corey did a great job installing everything, which is a real feat. It's like a lot of strings hanging from the ceiling. So thanks, Corey, for that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So thanks for joining us today. I'm going to share a little bit about my work, my practice. I wanted to share a bit about community, as well as some upcoming things, sort of stuff that's happening right now in the studio. So I'm going to give you a little bit of my background and talk about the way that I work. And I'm really excited for questions at the end. So feel free to, type those in. It would be fun to have a little bit of a discussion. All right, so I wanted to start out this artist talk with my studio space. So you can see here, this is me in my studio. My studio is quite small, and I always want to share that with people because it kind of contrasts the installations that I build. So I build big embroidered installations that sort of expand to fill huge spaces, but they pack down really small. So my studio is about 10 feet by 14 feet, not very big. It's filled with tables. I have a couple sewing machines and my thread wall. And this is definitely the place where I test out ideas. I spend a lot of time in my studio space. And it's also where most of my artwork is stored. So something about textiles that I love is this idea of breadth, how things can sort of expand to be quite large and then they can be quite compact. So Corey would have seen this when the show got shipped. It shipped in one, it was a big box, but one box. So I love the flexibility of textiles. I love the color that can be included. And I really think of it as like a drawing technique, a way to sort of explore line and color and all of those fun things. So I started working with thread when I was studying at York University in Toronto. I took a class, and I don't know if people in this talk have taken a class like this, but it was a class that sort of changed the way that I looked at the world. It was called Drawing Writ Large, which is not a very exciting title, but it was basically a class where we sort of blew open the idea of what a drawing could be, and we had all sorts of makers and creators in that class. So we had performing artists, we had dancers, we had filmmakers, and as a class, we decided that in our class, a drawing would be anything that was made out of line. So we had dancers dancing line, we had animators, animating line. And I started to look at the whole world as a drawing, right? There's lines everywhere. And then I started to think about how interesting thread is as a line. So it's so fine that it seems two-dimensional, but it actually has a three-dimensional quality to it. And I sort of made up this art problem for myself. So I thought, like, I would really like to make a drawing out of thread, but I don't want it to have a base. Like, I don't want it to be on a fabric. So the school I went to didn't have a textiles department. So I was sort of like on my own with trying to figure this out and problem solve. And so I thought I need a base that I can stitch onto, and then I need that base to be removed. So I started stitching into paper and I tore the paper away, but there's part of my like making personality that's quite uptight, maybe. Doesn't really like messy things. And, there's points where I embrace that and then points where I have to sort of put that to the side, but the paper just seemed too messy. I stitched into wax and then melted the wax away. Again, a little bit messy. So what happened is I sort of had to put my art problem to the side, and every summer I would just want to learn new techniques. The program at York University is quite conceptual. So we talked a lot about ideas, and I really love making things. So I spent my summers sort of learning techniques and getting my hands on materials. And in a book, I found water-soluble fabric as an ingredient or like a material needed for a project. And I thought, oh, that's exactly what I need. So the water-soluble fabric is something I use in most of my works. It's a material that you can stitch into with a sewing machine. And what you can do is sort of build up the thread lines, and those crossing lines are what make strength in the work. And then after you've created something that has lots of crossing lines, you can dissolve the base, and it's almost like a gelatin. It washes away quite easily. So in this work, this is a piece that I made during my undergraduate degree. It's my hands made at 1-to-1 scale. And you can see they're sort of pulling themselves apart or maybe stitching themselves back together. It's kind of hard to tell. But in this work, you can see I build it up from light to dark. And I'm going to show you this backpack. So in most of the representational work, which you'll see at the Delaplane, I work from light to dark. And I start with a white layer of stitching that sort of has crossing lines. Actually, okay, so this is what it looks like from far away, and then I have a close-up that you'll be able to see. So you can see some of these like crossing white lines. That's the first layer. And then I think of it as a drawing, like using cross-hatching, but using my sewing machine to do the cross-hatching. So I start then by adding in the light blue, which is like the lightest color, and then I move to the medium tone, and then the dark color, and then sort of the outline of that dark blue. And you can see those cross-hatching lines create crossing threads. So at the same time that I'm building up, excuse me, at the same time that I'm building up an image, I'm also creating structure. So that's kind of how the works come together. So something I wanted to talk about is after I graduated from York University, I was accepted into Harborfront Center's Craft and Design Studio as an artist in residence. And you can see on the left here, that's the outside of the building. It's right on the water on Toronto's Harborfront. So it's a great location. The building is a multi-use building, and there's dance, performing arts, music, theater, there's an authors festival. There's so many things happening in this building, and a lot of the programming is free. So you can see, so it was a great place to be. And then you can see on the right, this is the Textile Studio when I was there. They've expanded since, but we had 7 artists in residence in this space. So this was a really sort of life-changing thing for me. I had come from a drawing program, and then I was sort of welcomed into this like textile world, and I learned so much from the people around me. The studios, there's a textile studio, a glass studio, ceramic studio, and then a metal studio, and they're all along one corridor. So this really gave me a community of people to work with, to exchange ideas with. We challenged each other, and we also got opportunities to present our work. So my first shows happened at Harborfront Center. Here you can see the ceramic studio, and then I want to show everybody or draw everybody's attention to the hallway on the left side, so you can see a person walking through. So the studios are actually open to the public, which, you know, is challenging. Sometimes you're being watched by the public, but it also was a great place for me to learn how to start talking about my work to a wide range of people. There's all sorts of people that come into this space, some who have a real knowledge of art, and then some who it's their first time coming into an art center. And so we'd be asked questions, people could see us working, and for me, this was like really a chance to practice how I wanted to speak about my work. And yeah. So here you can see, this is the hallway at Harborfront Center, and there are some like window exhibition spaces. So these were the spaces that my first shows happened at. And I wanted to talk a bit about collaboration. So we were encouraged to collaborate with other artists in residence that were outside of our own studio. And we were allowed to propose shows for these window spaces. And I think collaboration had been like something that I didn't consider before the residency. And I'm going to show you two shows really quickly that really act as seeds for future work. And I think collaboration is great. It sort of brought me out of my own small way of working. Maybe the ideas expanded a little bit because I was working with someone else. And I think it was a really great sort of beginning for lots of things. So this is the first exhibition I wanted to talk about, called Still. And I collaborated with artist Margaret Lim, who works in metals. With this show, we were thinking about sort of everyday spaces and everyday scenes. And we recreated those scenes sort of like small shoebox dioramas with both thread and metal. So you can see the piece on the left. I created the trees and Margaret did the birds. We were right by the water, so we filled a case with thread and then had boats floating on top. These park benches are pretty iconic in and around Harborfront Center. So we incorporated those. And with these scenes, I was starting to think about, the everyday things that are really personal and environment and space. The next exhibition was called Glitter Beginnings, and I collaborated with metalsmith Adriana McNeely. And in this show, we were sort of thinking about the discussion that was happening in the craft studio about the difference between fine craft and kids crafts. And some of the artists in residence were getting really mad that people would mix up kids crafts with fine craft. And Adriana and we decided we had no problem with that because our earliest experiences with making were with things like pipe cleaners and glitter and beads. So we created this show where we were sort of responding to a material we used as a kid, and then sort of translated that into our current practice. So she would make a piece and I would make a piece, and then the middle space was filled with whatever material. So here I was thinking about lined paper and sort of the childhood toy of, I forget what they're called. And then here we were talking about perler beads, and I started to think about spirographs and sort of thinking about line and color. And you'll definitely be able to see echoes of both these shows in the work that I continue to work on. So I feel like Harborfront Center for me was this place of sort of collaboration, inspiration, and has definitely sort of set me on a path with my current practice. So this is a piece that you'll see in the exhibition. It's called Stand In for Home. And this is the first time that I went really large with my work. So I'm working on a 1-to-1 scale here. So for those who haven't seen the exhibition, these pieces are life size and they sit at different planes to create the impression of depth. So when you stand right in front of them, the works they come together. And then when you move around the piece or to the side, you can start to see the flatness of them. So with this piece, I was thinking about all the rental apartments that I was like moving into and then moving out of. It was kind of that time in my life where I was living with roommates, and it was the first time we were setting up a home for ourselves. And to me, this felt really special and really like precious. And I felt like those spaces were really fleeting and something that I wanted to capture in an artwork. So this was the kitchen space. So a window, 3 chairs. We had 3 people living in the house, and a table. And this piece was put up for the first time at Harborfront Center. And at that time, I was also working as a gallery monitor. So what was great about being a gallery monitor is I was able to see how people interacted with the work. So I think artwork, there's, part of the artwork happens when you're in the studio making it. And then there's part of the art that happens when you share that work and when people get to experience it. So I got to see lots of people like pretending to sit on the chairs or like poking their heads through the window and taking pictures, which was really fun. It started to act a little bit like a stage, like something that people could sort of play in and around. And yeah, it was really interesting to see. And Most of the time, this is a group exhibition. I didn't announce that, that's my work. I just, I'm just there to keep the work safe. But one day these two little boys came up to me and they asked me directly, like, is that your art? You must have had like a sixth sense or something. So I didn't lie. I was like, yeah, that's my work. And they told me that they liked it, but they had a few suggestions for me. And so I was like, okay, like let's do this. Like this is happening. And they said they liked it, but they wanted to see some other things in it. So, and then my follow-up question was like, well, what are those other things? And they said they wanted to see a ketchup bottle, a pair of shoes, and a dog. And which is great, so great. And then my follow-up question was, well, do you have a ketchup bottle? I'm like, yes. Do you have shoes? Yes. Do you have a dog? No, but we really want one. So I felt like this gave me like a great insight into the work. And I have to say some of my best conversations about art happened in this space with children. But what they were saying is they were projecting their reality onto this work, but they were also projecting a kind of like hope or dream. And they were also noticing that this was really cleaned up, like I don't know how often my kitchen was actually this clean. So you'll see in a lot of my work, I do one thing and then I often return to that. I feel like there's a little bit of a circle happening with lots of things. So this became a series. And the next series in the work, this is a detail of the wallpaper for you to see. And the next piece is the second in the series, which is called Living Room. And so I did include those things that never got put away. I took my critique and brought it to my work. So you'll see a pair of shoes, and then you'll also see some dogs. I had some dog paintings in my living room at the time. So I feel like those boys would be really proud. This piece was up at the Gladstone Hotel as a part of a design festival in Toronto called Come Up to My Room. And I felt like this was a perfect piece to bring into this space. Hotel rooms often have sort of signifiers of home, like a bed and a side table, but they're not home. And so to bring this piece into a hotel room, I thought it was just a fitting site to talk about the temporary nature of the spaces we live in, or the spaces that I was living in at the time, and to have it in a space that was sort of talking about that temporality. So here's a detail, is the shoes and the iron that never gets put away. Sorry, that's a repeat. So something I do in my practice is I often think up little challenges for myself to sort of get myself out of maybe a creative rut. I like the idea of a challenge or pushing against something that's sort of like a creative habit. So with this, this project, I was thinking about how flat my works are, and I wanted to challenge myself to think about how to create three-dimensional works that might exist more in space and address sculpture. So these are some fruit boxes that I picked up from my local grocery store. I really loved the decorations, like the graphic design on the pieces. And I was also moving at the time to Philadelphia, so I became really particular about what moving boxes I wanted. And then I started to think about import and export and economy, and also like the utilitarian nature of these objects. So what I did is I unfolded the boxes and traced them onto the water-soluble fabric. I stitched them together. So I sort of colored or shaded the design. And you can see that here is the process image. And then what I did is I dissolved them and then folded them up back into their three-dimensional form and stacked them together. Another project that was sort of thinking about sculpture and moving away from these sort of flat planes is a piece called Poppies. And this is the single poppy. So something you'll see in these next few pieces is taking a single object and then multiplying it to fill a large space. And for me, there's an economy to this, making small things, they can pack down really really tight, and then they can sort of expand to fill larger areas. So here's a poppy. It's made out of 3 separate parts that are stitched together. And then I sort of pull with heat to form the shape. I actually use a hair straightener, which is kind of an unusual art tool, but it allows me to sort of pull the embroidery into a 3-dimensional form. And then I multiplied this by 750 and hung this at Gallery Stratford in Stratford, Ontario. This was to honor the horticultural guild there, and Stratford is famous for its theater festival, which COVID has affected, but they have a Shakespearean and contemporary theater festival there. And then there's also lots and lots of gardens in Stratford. So I wanted to create sort of a theatrical look to this piece. I wanted to paint the gallery black, which, you know, is a big ask. Corey is going to be like nodding his head. But I wanted this almost to feel like a 80s velvet painting, you know, those paintings where there's these really dark grounds and these very vibrant colors. And as you can see, the field of poppies is sort of inverted. So you're invited to walk underneath and lay down underneath the work. So I like the symbol of the poppy for its multitude of symbolism, like I like sleep and rest, remembrance, death. And I sort of think about all of those things with this work. So I wanted to just talk about process a little bit. And if you visited the show at the Delplane, you'll see this work called Floating Garden. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about how I moved through the creative process and how this work sort of came to be. So my work always starts with a drawing. And you can see this sort of simple line drawings that I use. The simpler, the better with most of the work, just to give me an outline. So I'm always drawing on paper. And then I moved to sort of research. So with this particular work, I was thinking a lot about home embroidery kits, and there's a lot of floral in those kits. And I was thinking about how in interior spaces, we often bring like the outside in. So these like floral motifs are quite common and present within interiors. I was also thinking about pressed flowers, and the relationship to what I do in a lot of my work is sort of taking something that's 3-dimensional and flattening it. And then I was also looking at Beatrix Potter's botanicals and a lot of her illustrations, and thinking about sort of the color story that's happening in those pieces. So you can see that piece here. This is a Beatrix Potter drawing. I then moved to sketches and models. So I'm often testing things out before I make thousands of them. It's, you know, it's practical. And you can see that here. So I've got some of the pieces on the water soluble. Part of that testing is finalizing the design and then also setting up a small maquette. So I usually am not setting up the whole installation before I go to the gallery. I'm sort of testing out smaller parts and then you know, crossing my fingers and hoping it works when we move to the big gallery space. But something that was surprising to me about this piece, this was made right after the room installations, is that when I put it up, each piece spins. And that didn't happen with the room installations because there's multiple points hanging from the ceiling with the rooms. So that was sort of a nice, sometimes you don't plan these things, they happen. And I think that's some of like the magic of making work. So it was a good thing to test. It was a nice surprise. And then once I had set up the model, I could, you know, move on to, you know, spending months or years in most cases, making these larger pieces that have multiple parts. So on the left, this is my studio space when I was working from home. You can see I love watching shows and podcasts. If anyone has any recommendations, I need to know them because it is really long hours. So I spend a lot of time at the machine. I mean, it ebbs and flows a little bit with grant writing season, and I also teach. But if I can get like a good 8 to 10 hours in at the sewing machine, it's a good day. And then I'm just going to go through how this work looks in different spaces. So I also think of the gallery as a kind of studio space where I can arrange these pieces to be different every time. So, and I often add to the piece. I have, I don't know if it's a problem, but it's hard for me to say that a piece is done, especially when it consists of these sort of multiple elements. I always think that I can add more and like make it bigger. So this is at Lonsdale Gallery in Toronto. It's about 500 pieces. Then it moved to the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art. The really high ceilings here. This is at Memorial University. And another thing I want to say about this piece is that it's always a collaboration when I'm putting things up. I always need help. And with this one, there's a great team of students that helped me make this. And it was wonderful. It was so great. You can see in this work, the floor really becomes a part of the piece. There's like a shiny marble finish that almost acted as a mirror. So the space affects the work a lot. And I love sort of like how this felt a little bit more like space age. And I also love the mirroring because it like doubled the work, which was great. Sometimes there's platforms involved. Sometimes it's like a square, sometimes it's a more organic edge. So this is at the Schweinfurth Art Center in New York. And then a big part of experiencing these works is moving around them, right? So the pictures capture something, but I think moving around the piece, you see the flickering effects, you see the way the pieces move, and you get this sort of cinematic experience of the piece. Okay, I'm just gonna, and then this is the, one of the biggest installs at the Cornell Museum of Art where I expanded the work so that it could have a pathway through it. And I really wanted people to be able to walk within the work. And then also look at it from underneath. So I like looking at art while I'm laying down. And I do like when people lie underneath the work. I do welcome that. So another thing I'm still really interested in is spirographs and sort of kids' drawings tools. And you can see, if you think about the way that these works need to be constructed with those crossing lines, how a spirograph would be an ideal sort of drawing to create structure, right? So there's so many crossing lines. And I really loved, when I was making these works, I was thinking about these very vibrant neon threads that are really hard for your eye to focus on. There's a weird, like they're so slight, like you can't quite see them. But when the lines are accumulated, you get this feeling of a glow. And I really liked that. So I started by making these pink pieces, moved on to orange. And this is a piece that really just expanded over multiple sites and multiple years. It's one of those things where I was like, I can keep making more. I can make them in multiple colors. So this is up at the Todman Museum of Art, where I created sort of 5 clouds of color that would exist within the gallery. And I was thinking about, you know, color and drawing. And then I was also thinking about, you know, these sort of toxic or warning colors, like these oranges that are on signs that warn you of danger, and thinking about what it might mean to have these hovering clouds. This is a school visit. I'm so glad they sent me this picture. And then another great thing about these sort of spirograph shapes is that I could arrange them in different ways. So it's almost like I'm taking the marks of a drawing and bringing them to a new space. So with this one at the Cornell Museum of Art, I was thinking about making something vertical and thinking about, you know, a gradient. So this work went from the first floor up through an opening into the second floor. And it was one of the tallest pieces I've made so far. So I like the flexibility of being able to, you know, move things around and try different things with these different marks. And again, here's another installation at the Kootenai Gallery of Art. And then the different overlaps of color. I'm just going to check on the time. There's another piece called Accumulate, where I formed those shapes, those spirograph shapes, into cup forms. And this actually happened by accident. So I was ironing hundreds of spirographs, and my iron was getting built up with starch. And then by accident, I sort of pulled the edge of one of them, so it sort of came up. And I thought it was a mistake, and I was really mad at myself. But I stopped, and I was like, okay, well, if I repeat that mistake over and over again, all around the shape, it sort of pops something that's two-dimensional up into a three-dimensional form. So this is where like the space of the studio and experimenting really comes into the way that I make. And then that piece expanded into another installation. So this is called Pink Field Blue Fog. And with this work, I'm really thinking about an abstracted landscape of sort of flowers and then a hovering cloud. And there's a detail. And this is on opening night. So Corey, you were talking about how the light in the gallery really changes Floating Garden. And this was true for this piece as well. So the light at like 4 p.m. Sort of came in really hot and lit up this work in a really exciting way. Also looking at this, it's like, I can't imagine this, like such a huge crowd of people. Okay, so I'm going to speed through this next section, but I did want to talk about sort of sampling, and I love sampling. I always test things out. I love sort of that moment where you're playing and trying things out in the studio. So this is a series of black and white studies I was working on. I was thinking about how I was getting kind of distracted by color, so I took away the color and just worked with these two shades, and the possibilities are endless. So sometimes I feel like I need a little box to work within, and that helps me be productive. If I can do anything, I kind of do nothing. So these little like homework assignments for myself is something I often set up. I love testing things out. So these are some of those sort of radial patterns, you know, formed in different colors with different densities. And then I love color and line. So some more color studies. And then you'll see this piece, Sample Wall, is up in the exhibition at the Delaplane. And this is really a record of my practice since 2007. So it's an archive of my sampling. And it's arranged in this wall that, so it almost looks like wallpaper. And for me, this was, you know, something I didn't think of as a work for a long time. And arranging everything together was something really exciting for me. I often think I have them filed away in sort of separate categories for different projects, but I think combining all these pieces together really showed the range of work and sort of study with different materials. So I'm just going to show you some stuff that I worked on during COVID. And I took over my parents' backyard to work on this piece where I was scanning some of my embroideries at a high resolution and then printing them onto chiffon, and then sort of cutting them out. And this became my first outdoor installation at Harborfront Center, sort of a series of flags hanging in the trees. And all of this imagery is taken from Sample Wall. So I'm sort of reformatting it and putting it in a different context. And here's some more pictures. And then I'm also thinking about, you know, printing onto fabric and making garments and some wearables. So these are some earrings I designed. These lemon slices, I'm wearing the grapefruit ones today. And I've also been working on a series of patches as well. And these are really fun. You can just like iron them on your clothes. I've also been developing a series of bags. These are some wildflower designs. And then a big installation I'm working on right now and have been working on throughout the pandemic is a large installation that's going to be 3 stories high at the Chazen Museum of Art. I'm terrified and excited. And what I did is I created embroideries that are of prairie plants, and I went to the Wisconsin State Herbarium. A herbarium is a place where you have all these pressed flowers, and I used them as my source of inspiration. So this is my studio at home during the early days of COVID. And here are some herbarium samples so you can get an idea of what I was working with. These are some of the studies that I did in thread. This is the site, so we're testing out the materials in space. So it's just all a different scale, right? Like I'm not testing things out in like a small 10 by 10 space in my studio. I'm doing it at the museum. And then this is sort of what's going to happen. So I'm scanning these small embroideries, printing them onto chiffon and increasing their scale. So instead of being 10 inches high, they're going to be 10 feet or 20 feet or 30 feet tall. And then I'm fusing them on, I'm cutting them out and then fusing them onto a sheer fabric. And those will sort of hang. So this is me sort of cutting them out and burning the edges here. And so this will be a series of at least 60 panels that will hang within that big space. And this summer I've also been doing working on a permanent installation, my first one for Harborfront Center, which is very close to my heart. And we're creating a series of wire pieces, and you can see the relationship. And I'm thinking about scale and multiplicity. So we're going to have about 800 of these pieces hanging from the ceiling. And I'm working with wire, which is a different material. I'm getting it powder coated, but it really allows me to sort of do that drawing in space in a different way and have it be durable and appropriate for a 30-year run, which is crazy. So here's my little family portrait on the lawn to show you some of the shapes and colors I'm working with. And that is it. So I'm going to stop my share. Thanks for listening.
Oh, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I love being able to see your process and just some of the other work that isn't at the Delaplane right now gives you a really solid feel of sort of the breadth of your work and what you're doing. But thank you so much for that.
Sorry. Yeah. I wanted to share sort of the range of things. So.
Yeah. Rhonda Smith asked in the chat about the 3D boxes that you made from the produce boxes. She asked, let's see, how did you make them rigid so that they would stand rather than collapse? Yeah,
so that's one of the limits with thread is that, you know, it wants to sort of fall. So I starched the fabric, but they also have a interior box structure that was made from hangers and like these little bits of plastic. So part of my like parameters for that project was that the pieces had to be stored flat. Like I can't store these boxes, you know. Yeah. So the structure comes together and comes apart. So there's a small wire frame in each of those pieces, just so that it wouldn't fall. Yeah. And I didn't want them hanging from the ceiling either. I wanted them to sort of support themselves. Yeah. No, I love them stacked on top of one another. Yeah. One day I'm going to make something where I just go to the gallery and like put it there. Like usually there's these like complicated installs. Yeah.
No, I love the illusion of weight to them, like stacked on top of one another. It gives you, I don't know, there's a real visceral, like you understand boxes stacked on top of one another because you've done it before, you know. Totally. And like, that's what my apartment looked like at the time, is just these like boxes. And then that's also what the grocery store looked like. You know, they'd have these boxes you could take so you could put your groceries in them. Yeah. Good question, Rhonda. Thanks for that. Yeah, that's great. Oh man, I wrote down a bunch of stuff that I wanted to ask you about, but I'm not so sure where to start other than I'm really interested in sort of the lineage of textiles. Like we had a quilters show a couple months back. Nice. Yeah. So we did a talk with them and asked about quilting and their lineage. And I just was curious, as far as working with thread goes, there's this, it feels almost inescapable, that sort of this idea of lineage tied up with fabric and with thread. And I was just curious if you have any of that in your family or anything. Yeah, I do. And I have experiences like with textiles, like at a young age. My grandmother was really interested in all sorts of things. Like she did floral arranging and pottery and watercolor. And
She had this room, like I guess it was her studio, but she just called it a workroom. But it was just full of all sorts of supplies. It was the best space to go into because you could just use whatever you wanted.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was awesome. But she taught me how to sew and how to knit. So I sewed a pair of boxer shorts. I like remember that from when I was 12. And I did really like friendship bracelet making, like working with thread in that way. So that's macrame. But yeah, I think that there is like I was introduced to textiles through my grandmother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sort of get the feeling like, I don't know, the other thing about that is, you talked a little bit about community on the side of working in spaces with other artists and things, but there's for sure a sense of community in the work, not just because it's rooms that we're all familiar with, like, well, sorry, some of them are rooms that we're familiar with, or shapes and things that we're familiar with, or fields of flowers that we've all had some sort of experience with, but pulling in the thread, like the thread side of things, thread and community like have this really interesting interplay, those two ideas. I think because of our inherent relationship with fabric, with textiles, like all of us have this relationship with it. And it does a really interesting thing for me in a gallery space because of there's sort of these unspoken rules in galleries where you walk into a space and some people will whisper, and it's kind of built into the way that we've experienced these spaces or the expectation of them in the past. But I don't know, some of that seems done away with by the simple fact maybe that it's thread. And that's super interesting to me. I mean, I don't know that there's a question in there other than, like, are you thinking about, is that part of your thinking in working with thread or?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And it like that sort of tension you're talking about, it's like, it's something I think about all the time, because I think a lot of my like enjoyment in like making and creating comes from touching the material.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, I want to touch everything when I go into a gallery, and then there's like this rule that you can't, and
Sure.
there's reasons for that.
Right.
But I do like that idea that even if you're not touching the piece, you kind of know what it feels like.
Yeah.
Like that relationship of touch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my undergrad program, we talked a lot about how, like, if you're at least creating that desire to touch something, like that's an important tool at your disposal as an artist, like creating sort of that tension of wanting, people wanting to touch the work. But it sort of plays into the thing too that you were saying, the life of the work in the studio is really different and sort of fulfilled by the life of the work in the gallery space. And that's the other thing that I really appreciate about the installations is that you're sort of asking, and you notice this with your anecdote about the 3 kids. You're sort of asking the viewer to fulfill the work in a sort of way, like you're asking them to complete it through their experience of it. I guess that's what installation does inherently, but I really like that idea of the artwork not being this finished product, but it becomes more finished in time and in interaction with other people.
Yeah, Corey, that's like, bringing some connection to me, and like my desire to not finish a work or not say that it's finished. And I know people ask, like, where does the work live, when it's not in a gallery? And to me, it's like, it's stored. It's not really, I guess it's living, but in this very different way. Like the site completes the work, but then the viewer continues to complete the work, or complete it as much as it can be. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that reliance on sight, I think that for me talks about like how these pieces are temporary, you know, like they'll never exist again in the same way. Like when we were talking about you installing the pieces, you know, I'm okay with things sort of shifting and changing, and the space around the work is going to change the work. So yeah, it's different every time. It's temporary and fleeting. Yeah, even though it's like a solid material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That idea, I mean, I love that, you know, the Contemporary Innovations Program is for us to, in some ways, be challenged in sort of the ways that we can get stuck in thinking about artwork. And so the work does that in an interesting way, in that, like, if you think about drawings or paintings in the past, so much was done in order to ensure that it exists in this very specific way, sort of regardless of the space that it's moved into, almost to the point of like being hermetically sealed inside of a frame. Like if you think about drawings in the past, like that was sort of the idea, but this gives new life to the idea of drawings, and even in there being transparent in some ways, like it's picking up visually, it's picking up between the threads the environment that exists around it. And the other thing about that is just, I'm really interested in the idea of play. Like that again is contrasted with this idea of the finished product in the gallery or museum space. And I think for people that don't have an art practice, their only experience of the work is as the finished product in the space. And it sort of creates this distance, you know, there's the artist as genius or specialized artist, when really the thing that connects artists working right now with artists that have worked in the past is that they're really curious about things and they're really interested in experimentation and play. Is it hard for you at all to engage in the play side of things? Does it feel like something has to switch in your brain where you move from the play stage of things to the finished product sort of things?
Yeah, I think sometimes it is really challenging to be in that mindset of, you know, I'm going to play and there might not be anything that happens today that's good, but any work you do, I think it's Sister Cortita Kent's like 10 rules for teachers and students, in that she says, you know, the only rule is work, like just keep working and that will lead you to the next idea. But sometimes in, you know, capitalist society, and, you know, like there's deadlines, like I'm not outside of that. It can be hard to dedicate that time just to exploring and just to seeing what happens. And for me, I like need a good chunk of time, because it takes a while to get into that headspace, you know, like it takes a while to be like, oh, but what about this and what about this, and like that comes from, you know, being in a certain kind of rhythm. But yeah, I need to sort of separate that from like production time, or, you know, attaching strings to things or applying for grants. Like it is a really different headspace, and I think it gets challenging the busier you get with making work, like because there are deadlines and you need to have a show and blah blah blah. But I this like really resonates with me, because I think that curiosity is like one of those big things that's like a key ingredient to like making. And I say that to my students at Sheridan College. It's like be curious, like wonder about things. And I also encourage that mindset going into like an exhibition as well, like to not have to like contain and to know, but to like wonder and ask questions, I think is a good sort of place to start for both making and looking at art.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. don't see any other questions that have come through. Let me look at my notes here real quick.
Got a few more minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love what, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the sample wall piece is sort of an attempt to talk about that process.
Yeah.
And I think as a maker, the sort of unfolding that happens in the studio, like, and it's through work and time and effort and all those things, but there's like an energy or like a magic to that. And that's something that I wanted to capture in that work is, you know, that sort of like chain of events, or
Yeah.
like one thing leads to another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's so great. Let me look here. Shadows. I'm really interested in the shadows that your work makes too. Are you thinking about those? Or are you sort of leaving that to the whims of the installers? Well, I guess in a lot of settings you're installing the work too. So are you conscious and thinking of those things, or is it just the form has to take the shape that it does because it's an object that we need to recognize?
Right. Yeah. So the shadows are so interesting. They look like pencil drawings, and I love that relationship. And for like people that haven't seen the show, the shadows are like they're almost like the object projects the shadow. So the thickest part of the textile will be the darkest part of like the darkest shadow. So it really works. And I do like that. Like from material to non-material, or like material, that relationship of like light and dark, and the doubling that happens too. Like I think about memory in a way like where you sort of double and like you think about things and it changes things, and that shadow is kind of that element that is the work but is like not material. And I love them. I think that they're incredible. I did have an idea for a work that would only be shadow. I was thinking about using like fishing line and then projecting through the fishing line and then having the work just be the shadow. But I think the shadow also talks about that sort of temporary, fleeting, just like there but not there presence of the work, like the ghostly quality of some of the
I really like what you said about memory there. That idea is really strong. Well, we're closing in on our time. Any last thoughts? Well, you shared upcoming projects and things. Is there anything that you're wanting to make that you just haven't had the opportunity to yet? Like, I keep thinking that you have to do stage design. Like, I think that would be incredible. But
and I actually like consider that as like a realm of study. Like I'm very interested in set design and think about the pieces a little bit like a set. Okay, this is a good question. Like, what am I dreaming about doing? Well, I'm really excited about the wire stuff right now, like obsessed with it. I think I'm in that phase where I'm like sort of curious, and I've been thinking about how those could be really interesting sort of wearable pieces. And I've been thinking about funny things like crowns and combs and brooches and that kind of thing. I guess just more with the wire. And more chairs. I always want to make more chairs.
Really? Just all kinds of chairs.
Like, ooh, that's a good chair. I would love to make that in thread.
Oh man, I love to just like utilitarian objects being converted into these things that are just objects of desire that can be used is great.
The function, and I think like the structure of like a chair, like furniture, solid objects translating to fabric is that's really intriguing. And then the way that a chair is kind of like a body, but like an absence of a body. I love all those things. So awesome. I don't know how that would manifest it, like maybe just like a line of chairs. I'm not sure, but I'm always looking for a good chair.
I love it. That's great. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us and just for sharing your work with us. I'm so glad that it's up for another month and we get to hear the oohs and ahs every day, people entering the space. But yeah, thanks so much for taking time to share just your process and your history with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks everybody for coming, and thanks to the Delplane for hosting the work. It doesn't exist unless there's a space. So, and yeah, thanks Corey for all you've done.
Yeah, we're glad to do it. And here's my YouTube spiel. Check out the other videos that we have. Make sure that you subscribe if you're interested to our YouTube channel. Also, if you're not, you can consider becoming a member with us. You can check out the membership page of our website, delplane.org, and there's lots of great benefits and discounts for classes and all kinds of stuff from that. So check that out. And thank you all so much for watching and being with us today. Thanks again, Amanda. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.